And the NDP party isn't the only group speaking out against India's invitation to the G7 for this reason. Yesterday, a spokesperson for the World Sikh Organization of Canada spoke at a press conference to discuss Prime Minister Mark Carney's decision to invite Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the upcoming G7 summit in Alberta.
So just today, Global News has reported that a suspected agent of the government of India, linked to the criminal Bishnoi gang, was actively surveilling Jagmeet Singh, then a sitting MP and leader of a federal party, right here in Canada. And the credible risk to Jagmeet Singh's life prompted a duty to warn and active police protection. So let's let that sink in. India targeted a Canadian politician on Canadian soil. That's absolutely unprecedented. As far as we're concerned, that's an act of war. In October of last year, you may recall that the RCMP confirmed that Indian agents were involved in multiple homicides, extortions, shootings, all targeted at Sikh Canadians. And that same day, Canada expelled 6 Indian diplomats who were suspected of being involved in these crimes. We later learned from Canada's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs that Narendra Modi's inner circle, specifically Amit Shah, the Home Minister, personally ordered this campaign of terror, which involved gathering intelligence through India's diplomatic network and working with the Bishnoi gang, who was named in this Jagmeet Singh situation, to orchestrate violence. I'll point out to you that the Bishnoi gang, as recently as last month, took responsibility for the murder of a Sikh businessman in Mississauga. And despite all of this, Prime Minister Mark Carney has invited Narendra Modi to the G7 summit without any assurances that India will stop targeting Canadian Sikhs, without any cooperation on the ongoing criminal investigations, and without a single public concession, without anything about foreign interference that targets our electoral systems, our governments, our citizens. If targeting a Canadian political leader on Canadian soil isn't enough to be barred from entering Canada, then where is our red line? Where do we draw that line? In fact, it seems there is no red line when it comes to our community. It's telling Sikh Canadians that our lives simply don't matter. It says that even when we're targeted for killing by India, and our government knows that the highest level of the Indian government, including Narendra Modi's inner circle, is involved in making these hits, we will still roll out the red carpet and welcome the leader of that government.
Our correspondent Wyatt Sharpe has more.
So Wyatt, what do we know right now about the allegation that India was watching Jagmeet Singh?
Yeah, the RCMP had advised Jagmeet Singh in late 2023 that his life was under what they described at the time as credible threat, possibly from, foreign actors, of course, India being one of them. And subsequently, they assigned protection detail to him, around him, his homes, and members of his family as well. The heightened security in a way emerged kind of amid some of these rising concerns over foreign interference, of course, with respect to the Canadian election. We saw that both with respect to China and India over the course of the 2021 election campaign. Jagmeet Singh, as were all of the other party leaders, speaking out about that pretty heavily. There hasn't really been a whole lot said necessarily about the allegations involving Indian state-linked agents, if you will, and those people being the ones who were accused of kind of perpetrating the foreign interference, if you will. But Jagmeet Singh, certainly it does seem, right now might not necessarily be as much of a focus, so much as the government, facing calls now to uninvite Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India from the upcoming G7 summit set to begin on Sunday because of what took place over the course of really the last few years and what some would say, was Modi's inaction on all of this.
Now, we will get to the calls to uninvite India's prime minister, but police have said that Mr. Singh is no longer in the line of danger. But should the RCMP still give him protection, even though he's no longer a member of parliament?
It's an interesting question, and you have this kind of, question that oftentimes sparks a broader debate with respect to how we approach security for our political leaders. And, you look to people, even in the United States, where presidents have protection details for their entire lifetime, even after they're the president. Vice presidents get it for 6 months after, and they have the option to continue paying to allow the protection to continue. And in Canada, we really don't have anything of that nature. But, with respect to kind of the increasing polarized nature of our politics, it certainly seems as if that might be something that we need to consider. Even on Parliament Hill now, you oftentimes will see some MPs with either private security, or you'll, see a variety of different staffers kind of boxing them in to protect them from people who will walk up to them and shove a camera in their face, which is obviously, a lighter form of what we're seeing here. But again, it does kind of pose the question. Jagmeet Singh is just one example. You saw, a number of other MPs. One example is Michael Chong from the Ontario riding of Wellington-Halton Hills. He's a Conservative MP who also was calling out Chinese election interference, and he had been met with a number of threats as well. And so there's a lot of calls right now to expand and extend security, not just for Jagmeet Singh, but for MPs kind of writ large.
And now to the calls for Canada to disinvite India's prime minister to the G7, how much extra pressure does that put on Mark Carney to make that decision, seeing as it's coming next week?
Yeah, this is going to be a pretty kind of contentious, if you will, G7 summit, not just with Modi, of course, Donald Trump coming. I talked to you yesterday even just about Charlie Angus and a number of people wanting Donald Trump to be uninvited. Now you have the calls for Prime Minister Modi to be uninvited. And so really it kind of begs the question, if all of this is going to be kind of overshadowing the G7, it's likely to take away from discussion on some of the actual domestic and international policy issues that people are looking to have discussed. And so Mark Carney's going to need to approach this not necessarily from the perspective of how do we, uninvite Modi and India from the G7, because of course that would just further kind of make them more frustrated and perhaps more likely to perpetrate these acts in the future, but rather how do we include voices like Narendra Modi's voice in the G7 summit, while also being assertive and making clear that the actions of India's government over the course of the past few years will not be tolerated moving forward.
Well, as you just mentioned, there's a lot going on right now. How important is it for Mark Carney to really dial in the conversation of this is what the G7's about, and is the right call to maybe not invite Donald Trump and not invite Narendra Modi so that the G7 does have purpose?
Modi, I would say, is a different example than Trump because, Canada doesn't really need as much from India as they do from the United States. Of course, the United States right now, we're trying to work out a trade deal with them. And so Donald Trump, if he was uninvited, again, that would probably make him more frustrated and less likely to perhaps cut some type of, a trade deal with Canada. But Modi is a very different story. I think that a lot of people would be, totally fine if he was uninvited from the G7 solely just because that would send a signal to India and perhaps other foreign actors that the type of behavior, again, that India perpetrated will not be tolerated in the future. So I think it's two different examples, and you can't really take, a one-size-fits-all approach on this, as of course they're two very, popular, if you will, world leaders in their own countries. And so people are certainly going to have strong feelings either way about this. And Mark Carney's going to have to take a bit of a neutral stand, given that Canada, of course, is hosting the G7 and is the president of the G7 this time around.
But, given the conflict that Canada does have with the United States right now, creating a little bit of conflict with India, is that what Canada really wants by potentially disinviting Modi?
Yeah, and that's also a good question. I mean, again, I think the question really comes down to, is the conflict with India something that Canada really is concerned about? You saw what India was capable of with respect to their interference. And, you do raise a valid point. I don't know if the relationship between the likes of Mark Carney and Narendra Modi necessarily is the reasoning for some of the conflict that we've seen and some of the interference that we've seen, so much as probably more of an administrative state problem within the Indian government, again, with respect to various Indian state agents, with respect to other foreign actors within the Indian government. I think for the most part, world leaders have generally been quite comfortable when meeting the likes of Narendra Modi in various meetings and various press conferences, if you will. And so again, I don't necessarily know if uninviting him would be the greatest idea, but also at the same time, I think, again, you can't take the same approach that you would if it was someone like Donald Trump.
Well, Wyatt, thank you for the time today, and we'll touch base next week on the G7.